Hello mortals, I am the goddess who created the text world of Listernia, and there's a book that I read earlier this year that I really enjoyed and I wanted to share it with you and do a video on it before it fades away from my mind. And it's a book based on H.P. Lovecraft's work. Now, I love H.P. Lovecraft. Anyone who has played Listernia, the text world I created, knows how much Lovecraft has influenced me. I've even spent real money on such things as Cthulhu carols, which are these Christmas carols rewritten as Cthulhu songs. And I played a CD at a Halloween party I had once, and no one listened to the words and asked me why I was playing Christmas carols. I was so devastated. And there's also a soundtrack called A Shoggoth on the Roof, which is a Lovecraft musical spoof of Fiddler on the Roof. And I've been thinking about doing a lip sync to that, so let me know in the comments if that's something you want to see. Buy hockey, fly me through space. Now, Lovecraft has influenced many writers, from Stephen King to Robert Bloch, who wrote Psycho, and many writers have actually written in the Cthulhu mythos. Notably, Brian Lumley, who wrote a lot of vampire, but also Titus Crow novels, and August Derleth, who is an older writer who's kind of the, I would say, curator of the Cthulhu mythos. But there's one big issue about H.P. Lovecraft, and when I say that, I'm talking about the man, not the writer. But the big issue is he was a racist, a huge racist, a raging racist. And this kind of brings up a predicament we all occasionally face when we find out something unpleasant about an artist whose work we admire. I think, ideally, that art should stand on its own. And it doesn't matter how much of an asshole the artist was in his day-to-day life, but I find it hard sometimes to support artists by buying their work if I know that they're problematic. And I know I'm not consistent about this, and there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer here. Everyone comes to their own conclusion. For example, I personally cannot read Orson Scott Card because of what he has said about gays and same-sex marriage, even though I think some of the work he has written is pretty great. Ender's Game specifically. But I still read Brandon Sanderson, who is the same religion as Orson Scott Card and has expressed his reservations about gay marriage. But the difference for me is that Sanderson is more thoughtful and empathetic, and I don't mind having that type of conversation with somebody. Whereas Orson Scott Card is really vehement, it's really vitriolic, and I think hateful. And I don't get that from Sanderson, even though I might not agree with his politics. But who cares about his politics if you love his work? Now, at some point, I think I was a little apprehensive about Sanderson, but I felt that he was evolving, and at the very least, he was being sympathetic and not proselytizing. Another example is Marion Zimmer Bradley, who was accused of some pretty horrendous child abuse by her daughter and I think her son, but mostly her daughter. And I find it hard to read her because of that. And it kills me because I think The Myths of Avalon is one of the great feminist fantasy novels of all time. But for me, even though she's passed away, I find it hard to read her. But if an author or artist has died before I was even born, I'm much more likely to be forgiving, or at least overlooking any of their personal issues. Like Charles Dickens did not treat women very well. Not talking about his books, but in his personal life. But I have no issues reading Dickens. So what do you think? Are there authors you cannot read because of their personal life? Let me know in the comments, because I am kind of curious, and it is a question that weighs on me once in a while. But we're talking about Lovecraft and his racism. Lovecraft did not like black people. He also didn't like Germans and Irish, but he was okay with Hispanics and Jews. Of course, his attitude was not uncommon among whites in New England, which doesn't excuse anything, but we have to look at the perspective of when and where someone lived. And we are all products of our environment and times. But regarding blacks, Lovecraft was terrified of black people. But how he described blacks was analogous to how he described some of his monsters, like the Deep Ones. Now, this brings us to an author I found earlier this year who was also a super fan of Lovecraft, but decided to write a novel that turns the mythos completely inside out. The writing is terrific, in my opinion, and the concept completely revolutionizes the Cthulhu mythos. The author is Ruth Anna Emrys, and the book is called Winter Tide. There's also a sequel called Deep Roots, which is also really good. What Emrys has done is ask the question no one has asked before. What if the Deep Ones were simply misunderstood? If you don't know what the Deep Ones are, they are a race of fishmen or frogmen who worship Cthulhu and other ancient horrors. And you can correct me and say Dagon and whatever, but they are inscrutable monsters that crossbreed with humans. Again, Lovecraft described the Deep Ones similarly to how he described blacks. So Ruth Anna Emrys confronts this head on by imagining what if the Deep Ones were just as misunderstood as other minorities. In Emrys' imagining, these Deep Ones are progeny of the Deep Ones, look like slightly off humans, but with rubbery skin and large bulbous eyes. So they have a fish-like or frog-like features of their face. They're rounded up by the government just before World War II, but are then, when the war breaks out, they're integrated with the Japanese Americans in relocation camps. And you know, my mother was in one of those, so anything about that I find interesting. The novel follows Afra Marsh and her brother Caleb Marsh some years after they were released from the camps, along with Japanese Americans. And they continue to live with a Japanese American family that they had befriended in the camps. Afra is recruited by a government agent to help him investigate a mystery at, where else? If you're into Lovecraft, you might have guessed it's Miskatonic University. Now, right off the bat, I love the whole concept and storyline. However, this is only a 4-star book for me because it is very slow-paced. I'd almost call this a character-driven novel rather than a plot-driven novel. Also, I kept thinking of other Lovecraftian novels I've read, and I was expecting more horror and more creepiness, and it took me a while to divorce myself from some expectations because I knew it was based on Lovecraft. But I really liked Ruth Anna Emrys' writing. It was haunting, and I felt Afra Marsh was such a great character. She was sympathetic. She was a strong, scared, intelligent woman, and suspicious and hopeful. It was just a marvelous character. But again, just to warn you if you pick it up, this is a slow-moving novel. But I think it's worth it, especially if you're a Lovecraft fan. Now the sequel picks up, it's called Deep Roots, which I think is even a better book because it weaves in more of the mythos like the Migo and the Yith, and it has, in my opinion, a stronger storyline. You probably don't have to read Winter's Tide first if you just want to go into the deep ones, but I think it's good to read both if you're interested. Now, if you've never read any Lovecraft or know nothing about the Cthulhu universe, I think you still may enjoy these books, because the writing and the characterization and character development are so strong. But they are really aimed at those who love Lovecraft and are open to seeing the mythos get turned upside down. Again, one last time, if you pick it up, it's beautifully written, it's character driven, but it's a slow moving novel, and it is not a horror novel, at least not in any traditional sense. But both of these books get my blessing. I'll have affiliate links below if you're interested. Until then, may all the books you read be blessed.